Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow podcast. And on today's episode, we're looking at the Serie A title race. We hated Napoli's summer, but how has Conte got them flying again? Milan almost sacked Paulo Fonseca, but probably shouldn't. Are Inter falling off after their 94-point season? That's all on today's episode. So, welcome back to another episode. I'm Patrick Van Straten, and I'm joined, as always, by Ravi Ramaneni. How are you, Ravi? It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Patrick. I'm doing great. How about you?
Yeah. I'm good. I was just saying, look, this is like hibernation, winter mode from Ravi.
Yeah,
You're all
it's
wrapped
gotten
up.
really cold here in the last few days. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll see if we can warm you up with some Serie A talk today. Because Serie A, you were saying this off air, and I think it's generally true with a lot of football fans. It's often the major league that fans pay the least attention to. But I think it's the one that is probably the deepest after the Premier League. It's super interesting. And we had some questions from listeners who pointed out that we rated Napoli's transfer window as horrible this summer. I think we graded it an F overall. I think Ted had a stronger term for what it was. You were a little bit kinder, but we're going to talk through 4 Serie A teams today: Napoli, Inter, Milan, and Lazio. And we should start with Napoli, who are top of the league, which is obviously very funny, makes us look very stupid. So the first question I want to ask you, Ravi, is, given what we said about their window, were we wrong?
I think about the window, when we graded the windows, a lot of it is not just about this particular season. It's more of how these signings play out over a period of time and how a coach like Conte will play out over a period of time. I think none of us were in doubt. I think maybe Ted mentioned this in another episode or in another write-up in the newsletter that Conte is a great coach. I think he can get, in terms of X's and O's and getting a team, getting results, he's a great coach, especially at the start of a cycle. I think the issue is going to be how these signings will pan out as it goes. Obviously, it is still early days. We've only watched 7 matches, and they are top of the table. But of all the teams we're going to talk about today, they are the ones that look like are overperforming and have had a favorable start to the season in terms of the opponents they've played. So the thing is, in 7 games, it looks great so far. But there is 31 more matches left in the season. But I don't think we ever doubted Conte's coaching credentials. I think we said that the players that they've picked in the window at the prices they've picked, that is what didn't make sense.
And actually, you could even go further and point out that the players they bought in the summer haven't really played all that much. I mean, there's been a lot of focus, because I'm in the UK, on McTominay, but McTominay's got just over 390 so far. Lukaku's obviously been playing a lot, but he's still got 350 minutes, so that's only a bit over half the available minutes. Neres has barely played, Gilmour has barely played, Spinazzola's only played a couple of games. It's not like they made all these signings, Conte put them all in, and suddenly they look like a title-winning Napoli side. It's still a work in progress, even to integrate these guys.
Yeah, exactly. Neres is a very interesting case that, when we were doing the research, that he's played only 46 minutes or maybe 55 minutes, depending on how they count the last minutes at the end of the game. But he's had 3 assists and a goal, and it's super interesting. I wonder, when I think we discussed this when they got him, that we thought that was one of the better signings of the group, because in terms of attacking, but it seems like he hasn't really found a place in the way that Conte is playing, wants to play. So maybe he's coming on as a sub, off as a first change, and then that opens the game, and the game is open at the time, and they are probably shifting some things to get a result. So again, I think it's 7 games, so we're just seeing some early trends, and I think you'd rather have a good start than not. So I think they're in a good place. And the other thing that's going for them is that all the other contenders have Champions League and Europe to deal with. And this year, as you know, there are 8 matches in the group stage. especially
Yeah.
Champions League and Europa League. So you know that they are all going to be a little bit distracted with an extra midweek game. So Napoli is one that they don't have any of those. So they could have a more favorable schedule that way and be able to take advantage of that. And they have a coach that can take advantage of that.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, early return, just to touch on what Ravi was saying there at the beginning too, like you look at their goal difference, it's +9, but their expected goal difference is more like +3.5. So they're considerably ahead there. They do look like a Conte team, pretty much. Like only Juve have allowed less XG against. They're not particularly aggressive defensively. Like they don't go and press at all. So when they won the league, they were the third most aggressive team in Serie A by passes per defensive action. Last year they were the most aggressive, which also might be chasing games and things. And now they're 13th. So they're playing a much more conservative defensive style. And it's been really effective. So only Fiorentina have allowed fewer opposition deep completions. So passes into the 20-meter area around their goal. Lukaku, this is one of the reasons we look silly, because Lukaku has gone off like a rocket, like an elderly rocket. He's got 3 goals and 4 assists. But I look at his numbers, Ravi, and I think, I don't think we were necessarily super wrong about this, right?
No, I don't think we were wrong about this. Again, we didn't make our grade based on just what they will look like this season. And that's the hard thing to wrap your head around is, we're not going to do a pod next year to say, hey, we told you so last year, just because if something happens. And I think that the 3-year horizon for the way we graded their transfers, that didn't look good. I think that's definitely something that short term, 7 games, it's fine. Like if you look at it, next 4 games or next 5 matches before the next international break in November, Empoli, Lecce first 2, and then they play Milan away, Atalanta at home, Inter away in a span of 12 days.
Oh, boy.
So, sure, after that, if they stay number 1, then you know that, okay, now we're a third of the season. We're into a third of the season, and they are there, and they've beaten these teams or gotten better results against those 3. Then, yes, I think you'll start changing some of the narrative or changing some of my opinion about this.
Sure. I mean, the thing that I find interesting about them is that, well, there are lots of things I find interesting. One thing I noticed is that Serie A generally has very low shot quality across the board. There are only 4 teams in Serie A who are averaging above 0.10 XG per shot. No one is over 0.11. In the Premier League, there are 8 teams at 0.11 or higher. Chelsea are at 0.15. So it's interesting that it feels like it's a league where people are maybe more encouraged to take pot shots. But Kvicha Kvaratskhelia is kind of single-handedly bringing down that shot quality as well. Like, I don't know, maybe it works for him to be in a Conte system where there are essentially 2 attackers, right? Because there are only 2 people in this side who are over 0.4 expected goals and assists per 90 minutes. It's him and Lukaku, not counting Neres because he's barely played. But it is, I mean, I think his XG per shot is like 0.07, which is crazy low. He attempts dribbles constantly, but completes under half of them. Like, there's a lot of kind of hero ball going on with Kvicha, and I love him. I think he's great, but this kind of stuff does make me question a little bit more how good a target he'd be for the really, really big sides if somebody wanted to come in for him.
Yeah, for sure. I think some of that needs to be cut out. One of the theme that I noticed, to your point about shot quality, when I was looking at these 4 teams, is all of them take a ton of shots from outside the box. I think that seems to be a little bit of a league thing. So for example, Napoli is 40% of their shots so far are from outside the box. So now, no wonder, and obviously a lot of them coming from Juara. I will call him that way because I'm not as good as you are with the pronunciations.
I'm just guessing.
Yeah, I think that seems to be there could be a league thing. I'll talk about this with Milan and other teams too. That they do tend to take a lot of shots from outside the box, and on the contrary, they also force teams. This earlier you were talking about the defense, that they are not very aggressive up front, but they are like a mid low block type team where they
Mm.
will force teams to take a lot of shots from outside and really bad locations, and which is why they may give up some shot volume, but the quality of shots they're giving up is very low.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the defense being a lot better is going to help them a great deal, but I still
Yep.
do look at this team as it currently is, and I think Lukaku's 7 goal involvements from like 3 xg, basically two guys attacking, not a huge amount of depth in the attack. To me, it feels like it would be surprising if they ended up challengers very, very late. It'd be incredibly surprising if they ended up title winners, as much as I think, Conte is an incredible coach. What do you think
Yeah.
it would? Can you tell a story that results in Napoli being legitimate title contenders? What does that look like? Does it look like somebody who's not getting a lot of minutes now getting more? Does it mean we'd see more of Neres? Because I find it hard to imagine the scenario where this team is truly great.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I think you have to literally thread the needle in terms of this production to continue at this rate with the XG they have created, and they haven't really they're going to play tough teams now. I think in the first set, I think the one team they played was they only played Juve among the top 6 in the first
Yeah.
7 games, and it was an away, it was a draw, but beyond. So now, as I said, I think we'll have more answers after this next set of games, and Napoli has an advantage there because I think Milan, Atalanta, Inter, all of them play Champions League. Also, at least 2 more games of Champions League in the next month. So they all have 7 matches, whereas Napoli has 5. So that they could get a few results that way, and that's going to be how, if they win the title, they have to take advantage of that part, as I mentioned earlier, that all their other competitors for the title have European competitions, an extra 8 matches minimum to play, but they don't. So that could be. But then it goes back to they have to use more of their squad, especially on the attack, to be able to continue this type of production. I think Neres is an obvious name. I do wonder if it's a tactical reason there that the first 2 games they played a back 4 of the first 2 games of the season, and then I think they shifted to the back 3, which we thought that's what Conte was going to do from the get go. Maybe they're not finding a good spot for him in the 3-4-2-1 they're trying to play, and
Yeah.
I think that could be one reason why Neres hasn't been playing. But I do see that if you have to find a story that they win the title, it has to be using more of their new signings and getting more out of them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe we see, Spinazzola come in and the system just starts to like click in some other way. But it does kind of feel like even if that were to happen, we'd be talking about Lukaku's underlying numbers maybe coming up to meet his actual production right now, which does have them
Yeah.
top of the league, but it's a close run thing. Should we move on to Inter then? Because go on, sorry.
Before there, I think one point about, I think the defensively and anything, just as a team, I think they're being anchored pretty well by Di Lorenzo, Buongiorno, and Zambo Anguissa. I think that's keeping the core pretty well. I think that's, as long as that keeps going, I think they'll be hard to beat. And
Sure.
I think, and so then it's just a question of, can they keep, Di Lorenzo also helps on the attack a little bit, like in terms of assists, but I do think that just getting the other attackers and getting more volume of quality chances and quality attacks would go a long way. How much they can get it would go a long way in determining whether they will be a contender till the end of the season. If you ask me to guess their position or like where they might finish, I have to say, probably in the Champions League spots, roughly, I would say it's somewhere there at the borderline, Champions League,
Mm-hmm.
Europa League type position. That's where I see them. But again, they have the advantage of having, playing less number of games, so that might help
Sure.
them to be a little higher.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think I'd probably say the same thing. And look, today we're not going to talk about Juventus because we already covered them a bit. We're not going to talk about Atalanta because I think we will probably get to them at a later date. They're always fun to talk about. And Udinese as well don't seem to
Yeah,
me to be serious contenders.
yeah, surprise team to pop out where they are right now. But I think they are, like, if you look at the underlying numbers, they are overperforming quite a bit. So,
Mm,
I expect them to come down to earth. But for teams like them, this start meant they're already safe. Even though they still
yeah,
need to go a certain way, like that okay, that pressure doesn't exist for them anymore because
sure.
all they need is a start like this, and they could kind of get the rest of the points.
Okay, so should we move on then to the next team that we're taking seriously, which is, unsurprisingly, the winners of the Scudetto last season? So Inter, they're currently in second. They're 2 points behind Napoli. They've been kind of erratic results-wise. They lost to Milan. They drew with Genoa and Monza. Their last two games have ended 3-2. Which is, if you win, it's fine, but it doesn't necessarily, well, I
Yeah.
suppose you'd want to dig into the games a bit more, but it doesn't look like a controlled side. And they're kind of an interesting one for XG models because I was looking at FB refs expected goal difference per 90 and they have them at plus 0.64, which is decent, but it's sixth best in Serie A. And last year they were at plus 1.24, which is absolutely
Yeah.
insane. But then Understat puts them at over plus one expected goal difference per 90, which is still a step back, but makes them look more like the side of last season and the best side in Italy, 2 points off the top. So I was kind of like, is this basically still the best side in Serie A and they will end up walking away with the league? Or have they taken a serious step back and we have question marks?
I'd say after comparing these four teams plus Juventus plus Atalanta, I'd say they are the most balanced of the teams in
Yeah.
terms of having everything in variety in attack and being able to defend well and do it different, in different ways. I think that they look like the most complete team. Like all others they do have some weaknesses, but I think they're not as glaring as some of the other teams. So I do see them as the most complete team. Now that doesn't mean that they're going to win again, but last year I think there was a little bit of an overperformance on XG also in terms of
Sure.
the goal difference versus XG. But yeah, I see them pretty strong, but having a very sluggish start as a team. That's how I see them. They've of the teams that they've played, as you said, they lost Milan, what is technically their home game, to a late goal, but
Yeah.
they didn't really create that much in that. It's not that they were unlucky to lose.
Yeah.
I think in terms of overall, it's probably Milan deserved the game. Atalanta, yeah, they beat Atalanta 4-0. But again, if you look at the XG, it's not like a 4G type XG. It's one of those where they had the finishes and they didn't really, score effects type game. They are a higher pressing team. They're not like Napoli. They're definitely, I think they're fourth in the league in terms of PPDA.
But that's quite a change, right, from last season. Last season they were at kind of 12 and they were winning the
Yeah.
ball. I saw this. They were winning the ball in the final third 1.8 times a game, which was right in the middle of the division. And now they're at 3.4 times a game, which is top by a lot. So it's interesting that they won the league by 19 points. And Simone Inzaghi said, I've got this incredibly old team because they were the oldest team in Serie A last season. But we've added Arnautovic. And we're going to play much more aggressively this season. It's an interesting
Yeah,
move.
no, they're still the oldest team so far by weighted minutes played for this year. They're still kind of the oldest team in the league. Yeah, I mean that's a huge change, and I wonder how much of that is an idea to see how they can do better in Champions League. It's
Sure.
it's an interesting change now with this older group with the extra matches. Not sure how far they can sustain that. And they have a tough 5-game stretch coming up in Serie A plus the Champions League. They play like right out of this break. They play Roma away, which is like a huge match,
Mm-hmm.
and Juve at home after that, and then end
Yikes.
this set of games with Napoli at home. So yeah, so they are playing a tough schedule in the next five. So that's gonna give them an opportunity to separate them, to say we're still the Inter of last year. I think that you can see whether they could really win 2 out of 3 in those. And Juve at home. Juve has only conceded 1 goal. I just saw it's
Yeah.
pretty impressive that
It's crazy.
I think they conceded like 3 xg, but they conceded only 1 goal. Yeah, so I see this team is the most complete of all the teams. Like in terms of their possession, they can do counterattack, they can play possession. They're pretty efficient inside the box, and they're also decent with set pieces. So overall, I feel like their attack may be not the best in the league, but I think in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the variety and the balance, I think they are the best.
Sure. I mean, I kind of feel like the likelier situation as well is that this style settles in, they start to pull away. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
probably how it goes. But it's
And
one thing I
Lautaro has
did
a
want to,
slow start. Go ahead.
yeah. But I mean, it's counterbalanced by the fact that Marcus Thuram is on the most insane heater of all time. He's got like 7 goals and
Exactly.
an assist in 7 games. But I did want to ask you about the after effects of last season. So we didn't really like their window that much. They brought in a backup keeper. They made Carlos Augusto permanent. Arnautovic. They brought in a young centre back from Argentina. Zielinski and Mediterranean on freeze, and they added Fratesi. He was kind of their like showpiece signing, I guess. But last season, only 14 players got over 900 minutes for them in Serie A by the numbers that I saw. And 6 of those guys got over 2,500 minutes. And as we've said, it's an old squad. If you were, kind of talking to Simone Inzaghi, would part of an argument here, would you be talking to him in pre-season saying, like, we need to find a way to share these minutes around, or we're expecting a drop-off this season? Is that how that works?
I mean, I think it would be definitely a conversation on those lines of how do we plan to approach the season with this squad and this style. Now, Serie A generally, and I think Inter has always had older squads compared to other teams. So I think
Sure.
they
Yeah.
seem to know what they're doing. So there is definitely a bit of that. I think older itself necessarily doesn't mean that we have to panic, but it's more
Mm-hmm.
of how do we plan to use them, and what style are we playing, and how that is going to impact these players. So I mean, their pressing being so different to last year, that's a big change in terms of like what is expected of players to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if that changes, and that's a significant change, now when that is changing, you have to have some story around, well, we're changing this, what have we changed in our training regimen, what have we changed other around it to support this, because we simply can't flip a switch and say this is going to work now, because then you run into injury situations.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely, I'm sure they had a conversation about the sporting director side versus and the coaching side, and I would think that they have some plan in terms of, especially the older players. I think all their starters tend to be much of the older players, and you have to have something there. Otherwise, like we'll see again. Like I think we're only 7 games in, plus 2 games in the Champions League. So next window, another 5 plus 2 or 3. So you are now going to 5 plus 2, I think. Then you are you're getting into like at least like a third of the season. So you'll know better about them. But I do think that conversation probably happened.
It's an interesting one because I mean, I guess it's just that I look at it and I think, when you're playing in midfield, which is like Chalanolu, Mkhitaryan, Barella, I think I don't know about
Yeah.
making these guys run along. It scares me a bit because like there's Barella's great, but the other guys like Mkhitaryan has had a great late career there, but he's 34.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, the other thing is that it's not that they are set in stone that this is their style. We might see that
Sure.
they change back to more less of a intense out of possession playing style.
Hmm.
Then you that may be a correction, or that may be change that's coming as we progress into the season. So
Sure.
yeah, and if you look at, yeah, so I think Marcus Thuram, I can't see him keep up that pace
No.
for a long time. I'm sure Lautaro will pick up some of the slack, but beyond that, like, it is a very especially if you look at on the assists and who is providing these chances, it is a team effort. There is a lot of players being part of or providing that support from a creative perspective. So that's a good sign that you have multiple players contributing to that, because for a team like Inter, who's going to fight on multiple fronts in terms of titles, you need a lot more contributors.
Yeah, true. And I think even signings we didn't like Arnautovic and Taremi, Inter are really heavy on crosses. They're by far top of the league for
Hmm.
passes into the penalty area, but the difference between them and the other good sides is really just in crosses, right? So if you've got Arnautovic there and Taremi, that it's not like the worst plan in the world, like especially when you've got someone like
No,
DiMarco who's such an amazing, who's got such a great
yeah,
delivery from wide. That's an interesting way, I guess, for them to try and change things up. Um, how effective it'll be remains to be seen, I guess.
yeah. I think that, as I said, like, looking at them, I do see them as they will be a title contender, or most likely to win the title at the end of all this.
I agree. Um, I'm less convinced about our next candidates, who are Lazio, who I think are maybe the most interesting team here. So their expected goal difference is close to +5. That puts them among the best sides in the league. Understat actually have them top of the league by expected points. Um, it's a massive improvement on last year, where they were barely a positive expected goal difference side. Their top scorer was Immobile last year with 7 goals in Serie A, which is an argument for changing things before they stop working, I think. Um,
Yeah.
but when you look at their window and you look at their managerial hire, it's I mean it's a fantastic job, and if it keeps up, it will be phenomenal. But I'm kind of at a loss to explain it right now.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at them, the one big team they played, again, there's a little bit of schedule bit here, 7 games. The only team in the top six they played, well, not the only team, but they drew with Milan and then lost to Udinese, who, as we said, is a surprise team, and we'll wait and see before we anoint them as
Yeah,
a candidate. And their performance seemed to be pretty much in line with their underlying numbers, like the number of goals scored and goals conceded are very much in line with the expected goals for and against.
yeah,
They're pretty high in terms of pressing, and it's truly a cast of unexpected characters. I would say Boulaye Dia,
cool
who's kind of
idea.
traveled around, and he was at my favorite team, Villarreal, for a brief minute.
Yeah,
I think Unai, we wasn't like a biggest fan of, or Unai wasn't the biggest fan of him. I really liked him when he was there. I'm glad to see he's doing well. And Valentin Castellanos, who is from MLS, like, who made his career, who popped in MLS at New York City FC a few years ago, then went to Girona. Then I think he ended up here in Lazio, and he's doing well. And he's a good player. Like, obviously, you never know how players progress from or change from league to league, and there is always that, well, he's coming from MLS, there's a bit of a stigma. Well, some of it is maybe warranted, just because it's a league where it's not as difficult as, let's say, the Premier League, as demanding. But then I think it is different for individuals. I think it can vary from individual to individual. You can't say anybody coming from a league is better or worse than anyone else in another league. And
hmm
so I think that's a good example. And yeah, so if you go up and down their squad, it is definitely names that you don't expect to be at the top of the table or in conversation for the top of the table, but they've been doing it. So it is a very interesting group.
Yeah, and they've done this for a while. They've kind of been able to cobble together sides out of players who other teams didn't want. Obviously, Immobile is an example of that, and so is Luis Alberto, who's been an amazing servant to them.
The old Pedro from Barcelona had a second career or a third career in at Lazio.
Yeah,
right? Like, and he's still around, I think, but not playing as much. But he had a couple of really good years, I think, back. If you go back a few years.
yeah, and now it's happening to Matteo Guendouzi at a younger age. But
Mm-hmm.
Guendouzi was like the next big thing in central midfield for Arsenal, and PSG wanted him. And then he went to Marseille, and he had a really good time at Marseille in the Sampaoli times. And now he's at Lazio, and they brought him back. He was there, I think, on a temporary deal last year, and they made it permanent this summer. So he also is kind of one of these misfit toys that they're trying to get the best out of. They're also kind of trying to do that with their manager. So Marco Baroni is their coach. He's 61. He's been managing since 2000. He's coached 16 different clubs in the last 24 years, which is, that's an Italian career. What
Yeah.
do you think that there are loads of gems who could be unearthed like this from kind of lower divisions, like managerial gems, or do you feel like this is just a kind of? I mean, is there any sign you think that that this was like a really smart hire, or do you think they maybe just looked at who he was and maybe looked at some recent numbers and thought, yeah, that'll do?
I mean, I don't know how it does seem like teams like Lazio, who is the second team in Rome, or the smaller teams that are in big cities, they always are in the shadow of the other, their bigger neighbors, right? So they're always like have to come up with something innovative or something different, and to compete. And I think that Lazio is definitely in that boat. Like, and so I think over the last few years, surely last year wasn't very good for them, but I think a couple of years ago they finished second, right, with Sarri.
Yeah.
Right. I think they finished second. Yeah. So then you end up with like players that are misfits or discarded as, well, he has this fault, or he cannot do this, or he couldn't do it here. And so you end up getting them to a place where, well, like, but they have certain other good qualities, and you're playing at a team where the pressure is probably not as much as playing at a bigger team. So you can kind of join them together. You can make a really good process. You can have that as a way of building good competitive teams, of just looking at players discarded by big teams, or players that were supposed to be the next big thing, like Guendouzi, but they didn't pan out immediately, or Lucas Torreira, or another player that was meant for bigger things but ended up in Italy.
Yeah.
So players like that, there is definitely something to be redeemed, and I think football can do a lot better in terms of using that players that failed in their first big assignment. The fact that they got there meant that they definitely have something that that they've seen in him or the player. But obviously, for many reasons, like, players fail for many different reasons. They don't work out for many different reasons, and a lot of them are nothing to do with the talent level. A lot of them are to do with things around the player, like the surroundings or environment or pressure, or lack of familiar food sometimes, and lack of familiar languages, or culture. So there is definitely like a path for a lot of such. If there is a team that wants to take advantage of, well, I want really good players, but I don't have the money, or I don't have the attraction pull to bring him to my team. I think for a lot of those players, like looking at players that failed in their first big transfer, that's a really good market to look at. I think Lazio
Mm,
over the last few years have done well there.
yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. And I mean, especially if you're, well, no, I agree, is what I'll say. I don't think it's going to carry them to like a title charge. I just
Yeah,
think that there are too many teams around them with numbers as good this year, or better, deeper squads, better coaches. But that was one last thing I wanted to ask you before we move on from Lazio. So a smart way to build squad might be to go and find these kind of offcuts from bigger teams. But when you're choosing a manager for a team like that, for one of these sides that's kind of on the edges of the Champions League places or whatever it might be, do you think that they're too conservative in choosing their coaches? If you know that relegation isn't a realistic prospect for you, does it make more sense to choose a high variance coach who could see you finish in the top four and get that money, rather than going for conservative choices?
I totally agree. I'm on that train. Is high variance and doing someone that does something slightly differently to what everybody else does. What I mean is not the playing style itself. I'm sure playing style is a little different, but it's more of how they approach building the roster, how they use the players. And I think if you get a coach that is different from what is the norm in that league, you will have a chance of really getting, as you said, high variance. So there is also the possibility, the flip side of having to struggle a bit
Sure.
sometimes. But you are now taking that risk of, well, I'm going to bring something new that others don't know how to prepare for because they don't see this often here. There is a lot to it because if you think about it, like teams, I use this as example of, there was the time when 4-4-2 90s, a certain style of play that was very common, and and then with two forwards. Then we went into the phase of just playing with one forward for a long period of time. It's
Mm.
like a 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3, variations of that. And every now and then, when this 4-3-3 team goes up against a 4-4-2 team, counter-attacking team, they struggle. They used to struggle. The reason being that they were not training. They don't have any reps of training against that type of a system, that two
Hmm.
forward system. So then you don't know how to defend it, which spaces to occupy, or how to kind of keep them under control. And all you need to do is surprise them for 90 minutes, right?
Hmm.
So in that one match situation, what we're doing here is we're bringing a style or bringing something that is not seen in this league, and we're saying, hey, we're going to get good players because we have this process. We're going to find players that are high potential but have failed for some reason. So we're going to get really good players, and we want to get a coach that can do this slightly differently than everybody else does in this country or in this league. And that, then it will take a season or two for teams to catch up. Surely the top teams will beat you still, like the top two or
Hmm.
three teams. You will still not beat them. But if you beat all the teams that you're supposed to beat or below them, then you will finish third or fourth. And that's a lot of, that then you get into Champions League.
Mm.
So to your point, like there is definitely a lot more upside doing that, especially if you have some level of confidence that you have the squad to beat relegation. But if you're talking about like, keeping us in Serie A, if you're talking about Cagliari or
Sure.
Hellas Verona, like maybe it's a different conversation there. But I think if you're Lazio, you're right.
Yeah, it'd be nice to take a swing. Listening to you talk about that, I was reminded of the stories about Thomas Tuchel at Mainz. Do you remember that he supposedly
Mm-hmm.
had these diagonal lines on the pitch, that went towards the goal? He didn't want his players
Mm-hmm.
to go further out and to get to the byline and cross
Yep.
in. He was like, "We need to go narrower than this," and kind of
Yeah.
change the shape of the pitch in that way. It's interesting.
Yeah. So we did a bunch of that too. Like we used to play, our coaches used to do this drill. It was like a octagonal shaped grid,
Okay.
basically cut out the four corners on both sides. And then
Hmm.
so you have three, and then side, and so it was an octagonal. I was trying to figure out whether it was hexagon or octagon. So I was counting my sides. So it was octagonal. So we used to do that too. That's basically making the wide players don't, after a point, you don't have access to any more going keep wide in that line. You have to go inside. So funneling the play inside. I'm sure, like, if you watch YouTube, there is probably a lot of pep videos or something with a lot of tape on the field.
I bet.
We've done things where we would draw boxes around what we considered as a high, where we want the wingers and the fullbacks to cross from.
Sure.
And so their cue is that they can't cross if they're outside that box. They can only cross when they come into that box. And we also have specific instructions for the attackers that are going into the box, like the 9 and the 10 and the 8, to know that as soon as the player is about to enter that, or the winger or the fullback is about to enter that box, they know which way they are going. Like whether one of them attacking the near post, other one attacking the far post, another one coming late for the penalty spot. So it's sort of like occupy all those three areas, so that wherever the cross came, we had some numbers there. So it's a pretty common. It's very interesting, like how
it's really cool.
It's not like like training. That's really the part that I'm most fascinated about with numbers. Is like we can talk about XG and things a lot, and recruitment and all that. The one part that gave me most kind of satisfaction always was when that went onto the pitch and you put that, you draw it. Like in the end, everything I would say, like analytics, like the algorithm and everything on this side, on the technical side or the technology side, can be as complicated as it is. But on the field, it's going to be about that space, and the instructions have to be very simple. Like you make it a habit to get into this space roughly before you cross, or you start 5 yards wider, or your run, or you start 5 yards inside. Like your instruction, the final instruction is always very, very simple. And I think a lot of times we lose track of marveling at what is produced on the technical side. Wow, this took me to produce, like, had to use some really sophisticated analytics and technique, or machine learning or artificial intelligence technique to do this.
Yeah.
But then if you can't translate it to that simple message, then this is all not really it hasn't served its purpose.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. It's like, I don't know, like you can know a lot about physics, but like, can you actually can you instruct people to build a bridge? I don't know. It feels like that kind of gap between physics and engineering feels like the same thing.
I mean, a bridge is a big thing, but even like using physics to, I don't know, just to build something, you're trying to fix some tool or some mechanical thing, and you have all the knowledge of physics, but if you can't really know how that works here and try to untangle or solve that problem, then that's a big difference between application and theoretical. I think it happens in every field, not just football or sports. And there is always this tension between application scientists and actual theoretical physics or theoretical scientists, because they are both, their incentives are different and they look at the whole thing differently.
Sure.
I think, not going too far into academics, but I think if you say in football, like you can have a lot of theory about what needs to be done, or you can build a lot of cool metrics, but if you can't apply it on the field, then really, like, it doesn't really serve. It's not serving its purpose.
Sure. Well, we're about to move on to Milan in a second, but yeah, it feels like we quite often talk about coaches as like the best coaches, the coaches that have the best ideas, and like I guess there's some truth in that. But if they can't get the players to understand those ideas and perform the behaviors they need on the pitch to bring those ideas to life, then it's kind of all just like nonsense. They might as well just write a paper on it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think football has a lot of, if you kind of go back and look at a lot of coaches that are considered to be super geniuses, or like people that are great thinkers in the game, but not all of them have become good coaches, or turns out that not all of them end up winning titles a lot. It's just because it's not the same. It's just like not all great players or very few great players actually become great coaches, because it's a different skill.
Yeah.
Like playing is different from coaching, and and leading men and leading a group of players and making them do what you want them to do is different than just doing it yourself. So yeah, I mean, it's very fascinating how those are so different, even though they all look like they're all very related.
Well, I could ask you questions about this side of the game all day, but I think let's do a quick take on Milan before we wrap up today. So, AC Milan, they actually almost sacked Paulo Fonseca, who only joined this summer. They were talking about it, apparently, after that loss to Liverpool. They did start the season pretty badly. They had 2 draws, 2 losses, and 1 win in the opening exchanges of the season. Since then, they've won 2 out of 3 league games, including the Derby della Madonnina against Inter. And they have been solidly the better team by XG in their last 3 league games. Even the loss to Fiorentina. XG difference puts them kind of second in the league. So even though they're sixth, like they look pretty decent, I think. Wouldn't you say, Ravi?
Yeah, they look pretty decent. I would say of all the teams, I mean, obviously we're not talking about Juve today, but of
Yeah.
these 4 teams, I would say I would put them next to Inter in terms of if I have to rank the title chances.
Really?
Surely Juve features in the mix there, but just the underlying numbers, they look very good to me. Like they don't have the points. Obviously, Paulo Fonseca's start has been a little bit rocky. I know that there was also the episode where he benched both Rafael Leao and Theo Hernandez against, I think, Lazio. Who 2 of his best attacking players right now. So yeah, so it's definitely off to a rocky start, but I think they definitely look. I think in Champions League they're not doing very well. But I think in the league, looking at the underlying numbers, I think they are on a good path. I would use the same caution and same caveats that I said for all the other teams that we talked about today, that 7 matches. In terms of strength of schedule, it's been okay. They beat Inter in the derby and drew with Lazio away. So it's not the easiest, not also the hardest of these 7 of these teams.
Yeah.
And upcoming, they only have in the next matches, in the next 5, they play Udinese at home. Probably a very winnable game. I think Napoli at home probably is the toughest game left in this next 5. So you could see in these 5 matches, they could probably win 3, draw 2, or win 4, draw 1, or lose 1 type situation, and they are up there second or third, or even first when it's all said and done by November. So I do look at this team, and I think they have a lot of positive things going on. I think it's a big deal here that Christian Pulisic is doing really well. Out here in the States, that he gets a lot of coverage here, so he's been doing definitely very well for them. Looks like he's been injury free also for the first time in a while. Like he's always seemed to be bothered by injuries. Morata and Tammy Abraham have been good too. Tammy, true to his underperforming XG self, he hasn't scored as many goals, but he's definitely on the XG. He's been doing well. Theo Hernandez and as I said, Rafael Leao, both of them seem to have some off-field situations, but on field they've been pretty good. So generally a very good team. They also seem to be a deeper team than some of the others that we talked about now.
Yeah.
They have some interesting players. Chukwueze on the attack, especially Reginders. So yeah, I generally feel a lot more positive about their chances than say Lazio or even Napoli for the title.
Yeah, like I look at the problems with them and I think, okay, kind of crappy shots, like same as everyone, but they're the
same
only
as everyone, yeah.
The only top team that shoots from further out than them on average is Juventus, and Juventus just can't get the ball into the box. But they're shooting from like nearly 18 yards on average. But then I think Morata, I think Tammy Abraham, Okafor as well. They've got who they bought a couple of years ago, right, from Salzburg. But all those guys have shots from much, much closer to goal. So I think if you get somebody like that in the box, they can get free, and you can get them service from Pulisic, from Leao, from Theo Hernandez. Then that is a recipe for you to suddenly get like much, much better shots and get quite a few goals. They're very, very dribbly. I mean, the thing about Leao as well is that Leao basically is uncontainable. I was looking at him; his dribble success is at like 60% right now, which is bananas for the kind of player he is. But even in that Liverpool defeat, he was like 5 for 6 on dribbles, and he gets kind of that. If you look at Milan as a team, only Napoli attempt more take-ons in the league. Only Fiorentina have more shots off take-ons. They're top by far in carries into the penalty area, and it's literally all Rafael Leao. He has like twice as many take-ons attempted, completed, carries into the box as anyone else in the squad. And it's not like, Pulisic and Teo and guys can't dribble, but Leao is he's just unmanageable. And to me, the problem is he does all that, but then the team kind of gets baited into taking these crappy shots. If you can cut out some of those and Leao's getting you can get Leao on the ball on the edge of the box, I just don't know why you wouldn't do that rather than taking some garbage shot from 25 yards out a lot of the time.
No, I agree. I think too often, this is where it's hard to change player behaviors. Especially players that are senior players that are starters and set. You can influence. I mean, there's very few coaches that can change behaviors in a significant way, and you could get some buy-in and some way of managing some of that. But some of it is very hard. It's very hard to change them to stop shooting, taking bad shots.
Sure. Okay. Well. Maybe then I take that back. Maybe they'll just be crap all season.
I think that, the way to solve this is like, the way I would say is that we used to call this as avoidance, more of an avoidance strategy than actually trying to change him, is that, if you put him in that situation, 90 out of 100 times he's going to take a poor shot. Then try to put them only in 80 of those situations, not 100 of them, right? You try to so that's another way of doing it. That's something that you could do. Like you could move in terms of depending on the player, like you could make some adjustments so that he doesn't get into those situations, and you get the right players in the situations that you want to be. A lot of coaching, a lot of things is about, put the player in his best spot. So surely this whoever it is, like shooting poorly, it's not his best spot to put him. It's not the best for the team. So you want to avoid that. So that's a way to mitigate some of this.
Yeah, sure. Interesting. Well, I think Leao is having, obviously he's been fantastic for a long time, but he's having the kind of performance right now which makes it just feel kind of inevitable that he's got to move on from Milan at some point. I don't know. He's an incredibly exciting player to watch, and with Pulisic in this form as well, 7 goal involvement so far this season, Milan are a great watch right now, especially if you are an American. So I think that brings us to the end of our little Serie A roundup for today. If you've enjoyed this, then please do like and subscribe to the channel. We really would do appreciate it. Drop us a 5-star review if you're listening to it as a podcast. Make sure that you follow the Transfer Flow on Twitter and subscribe to the newsletter as well. Thank you very much for listening. Ravi, thank you so much for all your wisdom on this. It's so interesting to hear, I guess, a real opinion rather than me just watching highlights and looking at stats.
No, I think both of our opinions are what they are, their opinions. Another thing is, like, if want to mention that if the listeners, obviously there may be dedicated Serie A people, followers among our audience. And if you think about what you think about this podcast, if you have any questions or what we should cover next, or what you guys think about these 4 teams that we talked about, please leave a comment on the YouTube, and we'll try to respond. And if there is a topic that we need to correct our views or even talk about it in a future podcast, we'll make sure we take care of that.
Yeah. And if you're looking for some entertainment this season and you don't watch Serie A, then consider it, because it's probably one of the more diverse leagues around, like lots of different styles, lots of different kinds of teams. Really, really fun to watch. Thank you very much for listening or watching, and we will see you next time. Bye bye.